My name is Julianne, and I have been a private night nurse for 5 years. I have worked in many grand homes, but none of them felt as cold or as mysterious as the Sinclair estate. The property belonged to Mr. Sinclair, a wealthy 75-year-old businessman who had recently suffered a massive stroke. He was completely bedridden, unable to move his legs or speak a single word. He could only communicate by blinking his eyes. I was hired by his young wife, Lydia. She was 40 years younger than the patient, exceptionally beautiful, and always dressed in the finest silk and diamonds. When she first interviewed me, she smiled warmly, but her eyes remained completely cold. She told me that her husband required absolute quiet during the night, and that my only job was to monitor his heart rate, give him his medication at midnight, and stay in his room until sunrise. On my very first night, the house became deathly quiet after 11 p.m. The servants had all gone to their quarters in a separate building. I sat in a comfortable armchair next to the massive bed. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. The old man was awake, his large brown eyes tracking my movements with a strange intensity. It didn't look like the gaze of a man who had lost his mind. It looked like the gaze of a man who was desperate to tell me a secret. At exactly 11:45 p.m., I heard the faint click of high heels walking down the marble hallway outside. I stood up and looked through the small glass pane of the bedroom door. The wife was walking toward the grand staircase. She wasn't wearing her usual silk robe. Instead, she was dressed in a dark black trench coat, leather gloves, and a large sun hat that covered most of her face. She carried a small, heavy metal briefcase. I watched her slip out of the massive front doors. A few moments later, I heard the low, quiet rumble of a luxury sports car engine starting up in the driveway. The vehicle did not turn on its headlights. It rolled down the long, winding driveway in complete darkness, disappearing into the thick fog of the night. I turned back to look at my patient. His heart monitor was suddenly beeping much faster. His eyes were wide, blinking rapidly, staring directly at the window where the car had just vanished. He knew exactly where she was going, and he was terrified. Over the next 2 weeks, the routine never changed. Every single night at precisely 11:45 p.m., the quiet click of high heels echoed down the grand hallway. The beautiful young wife would slip into her dark trench coat, grab the heavy metal briefcase, and vanish into the midnight fog. And every single night, the old man's heart monitor would spike, his eyes tracking the window with absolute terror. I knew I couldn't just sit by and watch. My duty as a nurse was to protect my patient, and his physical reactions were screaming for help. On a quiet Tuesday evening, while the wife was out at an evening charity gala and the servants were in their quarters, I decided to inspect the master bedroom more closely. I waited until the old man drifted off to sleep, his breathing shallow but steady. I began to quietly search the room, checking the drawers of the mahogany vanity and the edges of the heavy velvet curtains. Nothing seemed out of place until I accidentally bumped my foot against the bottom panel of the heavy oak wardrobe. A strange, hollow clicking sound echoed through the room. Heart pounding, I knelt on the floor and pushed against the wooden panel. To my absolute amazement, it slid open smoothly, revealing a small, velvet-lined secret compartment. Inside lay a thick folder filled with architectural blueprints of the Sinclair estate, along with several legal financial documents. I carefully pulled out the papers and examined them under the dim light of the bedside lamp. The blueprints weren't just standard floor plans. Certain sections of the estate, specifically the old brick wine cellar beneath the mansion, were heavily circled in dark red ink. Handwritten notes in the margins read, "Foundation entry point, structural vulnerability here." My breath caught in my throat. These weren't remodeling plans. Someone was studying how to compromise the structure of the house. Suddenly, a soft rustling sound came from the bed. I turned around quickly, my heart racing, thinking I had woken the patient. The old man's eyes were wide open. He wasn't looking at me with anger for invading his privacy. Instead, he was staring directly at the blueprints in my hands, blinking rapidly twice his signal for yes. He wanted me to see this. He wanted me to understand. Before I could ask him anything, the distant rumble of the luxury sports car echoed up the driveway. She was back early. Shaking, I quickly slid the blueprints back into the hidden compartment, snapped the panel shut, and rushed back to my armchair just as the heavy front doors clicked open downstairs. The next night, my hands were still shaking as I checked my patient's vitals. The discovery of the blueprints had changed everything. I wasn't just caring for a sick man anymore. I was sitting in the middle of a dangerous puzzle. At exactly 11:45 p.m., the click of high heels sounded in the hallway right on schedule. I watched from the window as the dark sports car rolled down the driveway without its headlights, disappearing into the thick midnight fog. As soon as the taillights vanished, I turned to the bed. The old man was staring at me, his eyes wide and urgent. I walked over and knelt beside him. "Sir," I whispered, keeping my voice as quiet as possible. "I saw the notes on the blueprints. Is someone trying to hurt you? Blink once for no, twice for yes." He blinked twice, rapidly. His chest rose and fell with heavy, anxious breaths. "Is it your wife?" I asked. Again, he blinked twice. I knew I needed more than just a feeling to go to the police. I needed undeniable proof. The next afternoon during my break, I went to a local electronics shop and purchased a tiny, voice-activated microphone disguised as a small black clothing button. When I returned to the mansion for my night shift, I waited until the servants left the main house. While the young wife was upstairs getting ready for her midnight trip, I slipped down into the grand living room. I knew she always made a quick phone call in the study right before she put on her trench coat. With a racing heart, I pushed open the heavy oak door of the study. The room smelled of expensive leather and old books. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk and looked for a clever hiding spot. Right next to the telephone sat a decorative silver pen holder. I carefully reached down and taped the tiny black microphone to the inside rim of the silver cup, completely hiding it from view. I hurried back upstairs to the sick room just in time. 10 minutes later, the high heels clicked down the hallway, but this time, instead of heading straight for the stairs, she stopped. I heard her footsteps walk into the study downstairs. I pulled out my smartphone and opened the audio streaming app connected to the hidden microphone. I pressed the phone to my ear, holding my breath as the audio crackled to life. "He's getting weaker," the wife's voice whispered through the speaker, sounding cold and sharp. "The nurse doesn't suspect a thing. Tell the crew to be ready at the wine cellar by Friday night. Once the foundation collapses, the whole east wing goes down with him. It will look like a tragic structural accident, and the insurance payout will be ours." My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just trying to steal his money, she was planning to bury him alive. The audio recording played over and over in my head. Friday night. That gave me less than 48 hours to stop a murder. I looked at the old man lying in the bed. He was watching me intently, his eyes darting from my pale face to the smartphone in my hand. He knew that I had heard something terrible. I walked over to his side and gently took his frail hand in mine. "I heard her," I whispered, my voice trembling but determined. "She is planning an accident in the wine cellar this Friday. But I promise you, I am not going to let anything happen to you." The old man closed his eyes tightly and squeezed my fingers with the tiny amount of strength he had left. It was a gesture of complete trust. At 11:45 p.m., the routine happened exactly as before. The click of high heels, the heavy front door closing, and the quiet rumble of the sports car moving down the driveway without its headlights. But tonight, I wasn't going to stay behind and wait. Before my shift, I had asked a trusted friend to park a standard, unnoticeable rental car down the road, just outside the estate's main gates, and leave the keys under the mat. I checked the heart monitor one last time, made sure the patient was comfortable, and quietly slipped out of the side kitchen door. The midnight air was freezing, and a thick blanket of fog rolled across the grounds. I sprinted past the iron gates, found the rental car, and climbed inside. Just down the road, I could barely see the faint red glow of the sports car's taillights moving through the mist. She was driving incredibly slowly, keeping a low profile. I started the engine, kept my headlights completely turned off, and followed her at a safe distance. The drive lasted for 20 minutes, winding deep into an isolated industrial district near the old city docks. The sports car finally pulled behind an abandoned, rusted warehouse. I parked my car half a block away behind a large cargo container and crept forward on foot, using the shadows for cover. I peeked around the corner of the warehouse wall. The luxury car was parked near a pair of broken garage doors. The young wife stepped out, pulling her trench coat tightly around her, clutching the heavy metal briefcase. Moments later, a man stepped out from the darkness of the warehouse. He was wearing a yellow construction hard hat and holding a clipboard. "Do you have the explosives and the structural blueprints?" the man asked, his voice rough. The wife opened the metal briefcase, revealing stacks of cash neatly bundled together alongside a set of digital timers. "Here is the first half of your payment," she said coldly. "The foundation of the mansion is old brick. A small, controlled blast in the wine cellar on Friday will bring the entire east wing down instantly. Just make sure the old man is inside when it happens." I stood frozen behind the rusted cargo container, my phone held tightly in my hand. I had recorded everything: the exchange of the money, the mention of the explosives, and the cold-blooded plan to destroy the mansion's foundation. I carefully sneaked back to my rental car, my mind racing with a plan. I couldn't just go to the local police department. The wife was a powerful high society figure with expensive lawyers. If she got even a whisper of suspicion, she would destroy the evidence and find another way to commit the crime. I needed to catch them exactly when they attempted to execute the plan. The next morning, I used my short break to visit a private investigator friend, an ex-detective named Marcus. I played the audio recordings and showed him the video from the warehouse. Marcus looked at the files, his face hardening. "This is attempted murder and domestic terrorism," he said seriously. "We need to set a counter-trap. If we let them bring the explosives into the wine cellar on Friday, we can catch the demolition expert and the wife red-handed inside the house." Together, we spent Thursday secretly coordinating with an elite division of the state police. We arranged for plainclothes officers to be stationed around the perimeter of the estate starting Friday evening. When Friday night finally arrived, the atmosphere inside the mansion was heavy and suffocating. The young wife seemed unusually cheerful during dinner, even pouring herself a glass of champagne. At 11 p.m., she came to the sick room to check on the patient. She looked down at her husband with a fake, sweet smile. "Get some good rest tonight, darling," she whispered, her voice dripping with hidden malice. "Tomorrow everything will be different." As soon as she walked out, I rushed to the bedside. The old man's heart monitor was spiking wildly. He knew what night it was. "Sir, listen to me carefully," I said, looking directly into his terrified eyes. "The police are outside right now. We know about the wine cellar. We are going to protect you, but I need you to stay completely calm so she doesn't suspect anything." He stared at me for a long 3 seconds, and then he blinked twice. The panic in his eyes turned into something else, a cold, sharp desire for justice. At 11:45 p.m., the high heels clicked down the stairs. Instead of driving away tonight, she kept her luxury sports car parked in the garage. 10 minutes later, a white, unmarked utility van quietly rolled up the back driveway without its lights. 2 men in dark jumpsuits stepped out, carrying heavy canvas bags filled with tools and digital timers. The wife met them at the side entrance, unlocking the heavy iron door that led straight down into the ancient brick wine cellar. The trap was officially set. The minutes felt like hours. Upstairs in the master bedroom, the silence was deafening. I stood by the window, watching the dark shadows of the backyard. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from Marcus, the private investigator. "Teams are in position, moving in now." Down in the wine cellar, the young wife stood under a dim, flickering light bulb, shining a flashlight onto the ancient brick pillars that held up the entire east wing of the house. The 2 men in dark jumpsuits were busy working, carefully attaching small blocks of commercial explosives to the base of the main support beams. They were connecting wires to a digital timer glowing with bright red numbers. "Hurry up," the wife hissed, checking her luxury watch. "The midnight medication is supposed to be given in 15 minutes. I need to be back upstairs before the nurse notices I'm gone." "Relax," the head demolition worker muttered, adjusting a wire. 10 more minutes and this whole side of the estate will collapse like a deck of cards. The old man won't feel a thing. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the wine cellar were violently kicked open. The loud crash echoed through the basement. "Police! Nobody move! Put your hands in the air!" A dozen heavily armed, plainclothes police officers flooded into the room, tactical flashlights cutting through the dark, damp air. Marcus stepped forward alongside the chief of police, holding a video camera that was recording everything. The wife froze, her face turning completely white. She dropped her designer flashlight, and it shattered on the stone floor. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "This is my house. You have no right to be here. Lydia Sinclair, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, illegal possession of explosives, and attempted insurance fraud," the police chief announced coldly. The two workers immediately dropped their tools and raised their hands in surrender. One of the officers stepped forward and clicked heavy, cold silver handcuffs around the wife's manicured wrists. She looked around the room wildly, realizing her perfect, wealthy life was completely over. Upstairs, I heard the commotion and looked out the window. Multiple police cars with flashing red and blue lights were speeding up the long driveway, surrounding the entire estate. I turned to my patient and smiled through tears of relief. "It's over, sir," I whispered. "You are safe now." The old man closed his eyes, letting out a long, deep breath that he seemed to have been holding for years. But the surprises were not over yet. As the police led his handcuffed wife out of the mansion, the old man slowly, miraculously, began to wiggle the fingers of his right hand. 6 months later, the dark fog that once hung over the Sinclair estate had completely cleared, replaced by the bright, warm sunshine of a beautiful spring morning. The courtroom trial had been the talk of the entire country. With the undeniable audio recordings, the video footage from the warehouse, and the physical evidence of the explosives caught by the police, the justice system moved swiftly. The greedy young wife and her dangerous accomplices were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the biggest miracle was happening inside the mansion itself. Freed from the constant stress and the toxic presence of his calculating wife, the old man's health began to improve at an unbelievable speed. With intensive physical therapy and excellent medical care, he did something the doctors said was impossible. He regained his ability to speak. I sat with him on the grand outdoor terrace, the morning sun sparkling against the manicured gardens. He was sitting upright in a comfortable chair, no longer trapped in his bed. He held a glass of fresh orange juice in his right hand, which was now steady and strong. "Julianne," he said, his voice a bit raspy but completely clear. "If you had not looked through that door on your very first night, I would be buried beneath the rubble of this house. You didn't just do your job, you risked your life to save mine." I smiled, setting down my medical clipboard. "I just did what any good nurse would do, Mr. Sinclair. I listened to my patient when everyone else ignored him." He shook his head gently and pulled a formal legal document from a leather folder on the table. It was a newly signed will, completely separating his vast inheritance from his former wife and restructuring his entire estate. "I am setting up a national foundation for private medical care and patient protection," he announced proudly, pointing to the top header of the paper. "It will be dedicated to training nurses to spot signs of domestic elder abuse and vulnerable patient endangerment. And I want you to be the executive director." My eyes welled with happy tears. I had started this assignment as a regular night nurse, just trying to earn a living. Now, because I chose to follow a suspicious luxury sports car into the midnight fog, I was going to help protect thousands of helpless patients all over the world. As we looked out over the beautiful, peaceful estate, I knew that justice had finally won, and a bright new chapter had truly begun. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to Storyline English. See you next time.